Hi everyone, I'm Kuhu Srivastav, social media manager at Roli Books, and you're watching Roli Pulse, brought to you by Roli Books. If you haven't already, go hit the bell icon and subscribe to our channel. And you can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to never miss an update. Today's conversation is about our new book, Indian Innovation, Not Jugaad: 100 Ideas That Transformed India by Dinesh Sharma. Dinesh Sharma is a New Delhi-based award-winning journalist and author with over 35 years of professional experience. He has written extensively on science and technology, climate change, health, environment, and innovation for national and international media, including The Lancet and The Wire, and has also been a visiting faculty at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Dinesh Sharma will be in conversation with Dr. Meherwan today. Dr. Meherwan is a scientist and a science communicator. He has a keen interest in understanding the interrelations between science and society. I welcome you both. So, Dr. Meherwan, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Kuhu. I welcome Dr. Dinesh Sharma for this conversation. And I have just finished reading the book, and it's really insightful and very nice book. And I'm really exciting. I'm excited to talk to you on the book now. So it's a general perception in common public that we do not innovate that much as the developing countries do. And your new book talks about the 100 innovations actually which shaped India, the innovations which were innovated after independence, we should say. And it must have been a very Herculean task and very risky task also to shortlist these innovations. But this is also a very out of the box kind of idea to list, to actually document these innovations. So let me start with the question that how did you get the idea to write this book?
Thank you, Meher. I'm glad that you liked the book because you've also been a science communicator and you could keep writing on science and technology in India. And as you said in the beginning, that the general notion about India is that we don't innovate enough because that's what people feel, and there's a kind of a pessimism about the contribution of science and technology or innovation to the society in general. But the perception is wrong, and that one of the reasons of writing that book was to break that myth that as a society, as a country, we don't innovate or we don't have ideas that can transform our lives or affect the society at large. And also the second reason is that there are different notions about innovation. Because the moment you say the word innovation, we are looking at it through different prisms. One is, of course, the technology based. That's the most prevalent notion about innovation all over the world. And that has been sort of, you can say, emanated from this whole concept of having a technology enclosure like a Silicon Valley where new ideas come in, technology-based products come to the market. So when people look at India from that perspective, they feel that, okay, we have not done much. But that's only a limited definition of innovation, and we can talk about it further. So when we talk about innovation in Indian context, in a societal context, we have to look at ideas which have affected the lives of most of the people, and also ideas which have come not just from science and technology and formal institutions, but from different sectors and in different sectors. So I think these were the 2-3 ideas when started working on the book, and I really liked when Roli commissioned me to write this book because, as you know, I've been writing on science and technology for a long time and interacting with people in the labs and meeting people behind those ideas, which what we call the R&D or the innovation ecosystem in India. So I thought that why not put together all those ideas, and that's how we started building the list. And see, the canvas was very long, as we know that this whole book is about. The starting point is 1947 when India gained independence, and that we started building our scientific institutions, our research institutions, our higher technology institutions like IITs and several other institutions. And that's the so-called the organized science started around 1947. So that was a good starting point. And of course, we are celebrating 75 years. So that time frame is that. And 100 was, arrived at the figure of 100 was to, it looked nice because one could have talked about more, but we had to limit that. And that became a sort of, I would not call a hurdle or hindrance, but that was a challenge. Because when I look at different sectors, from science and technology to environment to everything, to health to social sector and all the areas, the transportation and different sectors. So that became a challenge at what to include and what not to. So I evolved kind of a methodology. For example, if you take say education sector or literacy, what was the rate of literacy at the time of India's independence and what it is now, or what was the life expectancy at 1947 and what is the life expectancy now. And then I started looking at what factors brought about this change, and within that then I started picking up ideas. So that's how I sort of zeroed in on ideas for different sectors. So that is the broad methodology and the numbers which we are talking about.
The chapters are very insightful and very informative, I should say. And I feel that the research journey should have been very, very interesting.
Yeah, of course. As I said, I've been in this field for quite some time, and it's been so fortunate that I could meet some of the people behind those innovations, or even have a personal interaction with many of the scientists, the personalities. And also when you're growing up in a certain period, and I feel that every book is also a personal journey of the author and the writer, because you're always affected by what you see, what you experience. So things which I've seen as a child, for example, Newton's stove, that remained stuck in my mind that there was something like this. But when I started researching, I could find out that it was really a great idea at that time, because India had just got the oil shock, the kerosene was short, and there was a shortage of kerosene which was being imported. So the innovation was that this a stove which gave the blue flame, and sort of was very efficient, and so you could save millions of dollars of import bill on kerosene. So, but I broadly had these ideas in mind, but did not know the full story behind them. So that was what I tried to bring those stories. So both from personal experience prior to my becoming a journalist, and also, of course, when I became a journalist. And some of these sectors I have looked at very, been fortunate to cover and interact with the main players. For example, the information and communication technology through the 80s and 90s, I covered intensively.
Yeah.
So I really had a touch with the people who are behind these innovations, and that helped a lot. Plus, of course, the secondary research and looking at the ideas. So that's how the whole story was built around. So I think that way it's important, and that's why many people of my generation are able to connect with some of these ideas. They said, you remember that kerosene stove, or you remember the you know the railway reservation, because people who are born today or in the say post millennium will not know the difficulties people had in booking a railway ticket. So railway reservation, the computerization of it was great. So a lot of people of my generation are able to connect, and a lot of people of younger generation are also able to know that the journey which we have taken, because of course those ideas are there and they have evolved over a time. And at that time, of course, internet was not there, so it was online in the sense that the database was online and people could the different stations were connected, so you could reserve anywhere to anywhere from any station. So that way it was online, but it was not online in the sense that you could book from your own mobile system. So of course things have evolved, the technologies have evolved. So I think what I'm finding from anecdotal experience, that it is people are able to connect with ideas, and those who are not of that era are able to kind of learn about it, and they feel fascinated that Because it's also important that when you see a certain development, to that curiosity should be there, that how did we come to this point? And that's what I think some of these ideas are trying to address that.
Yeah, it's both nostalgic and to a generation, and it's opening a new kind of world for a generation, the younger generation especially.
Yes.
And you have used our Jugaad in the title. So this is interesting. Please explain it a bit.
Yeah, so in the beginning, I talked to you about those 2, 3 myths about innovation, that we don't do much, or number two is that it is a technology driven. So developed countries are much ahead of us in technology. And third major, we'll have to look at how this thing evolved and how this word got into the mainstream discussion. Because of course, as we know, Jugaad is something you try to solve a problem uh, through a shortcut, or something which is not done in a proper way, and you try to. I think that is the reason I wanted to put that Indian innovation, not Jugaad, because the moment we say Jugaad, it connotes certain kind of idea where you're trying to circumvent the right way of doing a thing. You're not doing things in a proper way. You're trying to, of course, solve a problem, but it's a temporary solution to a problem. For example, how did this whole thing come? Because in the rural areas, when the agriculture revolution took place in the 60s, and people needed to transport their produce to the mandis and places like that, from fields to villages to mandis, they started. There was lack of rural transportation and proper vehicle which could take this. So if tractors could not be taken to long distances, people developed this kind of a contraption, and that got multiplied in various places where you put parts of a used car with some cart and things, try to move around. But it was hazardous, and Jugaad is a solution. It is not only temporary, but it also has that got into this whole jargon. And when in the 90s, when realization, they looked at some of these ideas and said, came in here, but then it was a wrong side they picked up and tried to glorify this short method of doing things.
Yeah, so I have observed that you have categorized those innovations in 10 categories. And the categories are too broad, these are not dealing only with technology. So what was the idea behind it? It's really interesting. It's also, kind of notion breaking, as you have also mentioned before. So what was the idea of including all these fields and ideas especially?
Yeah. So as I said, this whole notion that uh, innovation could take place only in the arena of science and technology, or only in the formal sectors. That was another, myth breaker which I wanted to bring in here, because innovation can take place anywhere. It could be a new marketing idea. It could be a creative way of doing an old, you know, uh, solution, or it could be an adaptation on an old idea and a new cultural setup. So it could be a variety of things, even a creative policy, a new way of marketing things. So that's why I wanted to include ideas which went beyond science and technology. Otherwise, it becomes a list of, of course, achievements, which are all great, because you have launched satellites, you have done missiles, you have done great in all the science-led sectors where R&D has helped us build capabilities. But here I wanted to look at the innovations which have come in different sectors, including informal. For example, there are a few entries on the grassroots innovations. There are a few examples of the marketing innovations, like the sachet to sell shampoos and to everything, because it started with shampoos, and today practically everything is available in the form of a sachet. So it is important to recognize these innovations, these ideas as innovation, because see, it is not just the technology. sometimes a mix of technology and a creative way of delivery can make an innovation. For example, STD booth. So there the idea was not just the technology of having a booth, because booths are there in the Western world all the time when we have seen in the movies the telephone booths, the red booths and all that. But the creative approach here was that in the 80s, the government was not in a position politically to privatize Department of Telecom, which provided the telephone services. Yet it wanted to address the shortages. So how could it be done? One way was that, okay, instead of letting people own a phone for which you will have to wait for a long time, why not create booths, and booths which are manned by private persons, not by the Department of Telecom. So what in effect they did was that from one point, that is from the telephone exchange to the booth, the service was provided by the Department of Telecom, but the delivery of the service, that is the delivery of making it, the service of making a telephone call was privatized. So on paper and in effect, the Department of Telecom owned the telephone lines, but it was not providing the service. So that way, this hurdle of not privatizing a telecom service, which was considered a core service at that time, was overcome. So it was not just the booth part, it was the policy part that made it possible. It can be a mix of solutions that can make things work. For example, the UPI, it's a frugal innovation, but it lets people use, the service, people who are not even having a smartphone. See, the smartphone-based solutions are there for everybody. So technology has made it available, but the access to technology was not there. So was a barrier. So how many Indians can own a smartphone today? No, it's a sizable number, but not everybody. But if you want to provide a financial service and include people into that, you needed a frugal and innovative idea. That's how this piece of software that works on a feature phone also. So I would say it's not always the technology per se, but it's a technology and a mix of doing things. So that's how we got entries which are beyond, technology, beyond the formal system. So there are informal sectors, for example, citizen science that might interest you. So this whole idea of involving, people, ordinary people in doing collecting data and being part of scientific projects. It started with a small project and it has become very big. Then there are people's movements. There's this newspaper which is run by women. So those are the ideas which are happening everywhere in the society, and they are impacting people. So some of them are just, for example, in the pandemic, we had this whole idea of, if the people cannot get oxygen at a particular in the hospitals, or they can't afford at home, can they go to a common place which is well known in the society, where they go on a regular basis? Can it be made available there? So those are the kind of solutions or the ideas which respond to certain deficiencies, respond to certain situations, and respond to certain demands of the society. I mean, nobody would have thought that sitting in a lab that let us open a lung for oxygen, but it emanated from the needs of the society, and that it was specific to that context. So that's where we need to expand this definition of innovation, and that will also make people think differently. These are things which inspire people, so they can look at doing things in a different way, on their own. Why not?
Yeah. And how do you perceive the participation ratio, I mean, of government-driven movements or policies, and on the technologies, and the individual-driven initiatives and the groups-driven initiatives? So how do you perceive in the ratio of all these three stakeholders?
Well, it may not be proper to bring it down in the numbers, because you can't do that, because things which start in the government, ultimately different players join and it gets disseminated in the public. But certainly, because as I said, in 1947 we started investments in S&T as a part of nation building. So that has paid dividends. And if you look at the first part, I think, about the revolutions, most of those ideas do come from formal institutions, CSIR, ICMR, ICAR and all the research councils. So a lot of ideas have come out of that. The Green Revolution idea or the Swaraj Tractor, which came out of CSIR, and the affordable drugs, all the so-called reverse engineering work was that process of developing, those drugs, synthesizing those known molecules. It is not something which is given. You have to have a process for that. So that came out from CSR Labs. So that has been there. But also we have to see that how do these ideas get disseminated in society? Various players come at different times, and they have a different role. For example, if you take Green Revolution, a major part there was how do you disseminate the idea to the farmers, because they have been used to certain kind of farming, they have been used to certain kind of water use, and they are not used to fertilizer use. So how do you introduce those ideas? So you needed to change behavior of people. And therefore, the creative solution came from ISRO, not from a sense of, Krishi Darshan. It's all started from ISRO, the Kheda experiment. So you needed a different kind of television programming. You needed a different kind of radio programming to disseminate that idea into the society. So technology alone would not have helped. I mean, you could not have gone and just told farmers, okay, you start to use this, or it will benefit. You have to demonstrate them. So this whole idea of extension services using radio and television to promote agriculture technology, it involves social scientists, it involves broadcasters, it involves program makers, and a whole lot of people other than scientists. So yes, there is a chain. I would always say that from the time an idea is thought about or a technology is developed to the time it gets disseminated in the society to the last man, there are various players involved. So that is important. And that's another thing which I have tried to do in this book, is also identify those links and name people. And, of course, everybody could not be named because that would have taken a long time, but at least the major players, the personalities I have tried to bring in. So yes, the government did have a role to play at various points, but also there were other players who came in and did. And also in many policies, government took up ideas which came from the voluntary sector. New laws have been formulated, new policies have come up based on the ideas which have been tried and tested by voluntary sector. So there's been a both give and take. And
Yeah, and I really like the historical accounts which are in the book, and those are very nicely written and very nicely expressed in so much simple terms that a common man can read the book and understand. I think this is the people's book. I think, I mean, we can't say that it should be read by the experts, but this is, I think, the people's book, which I found it actually. You talked about Aadhaar. I mean, there is again a common notion that we generally get inspired by the ideas of others, and we try to somehow mimic, or I mean, get inspired by them. But I think the copying of idea is not, I mean, it doesn't work many times, because the the stakeholders and the circumstances and the other conditions which actually are in other countries is much different than India. So I mean, if we talk about Aadhaar also, I have, I mean, read a little bit about Aadhaar. Like in India, we have so many blind people, and the people who have defects in the eyes, and the people who are working in the, I mean, uh, uh, mills, etc. The fingerprints were not clear. So I mean, so the people innovated. I mean, the conditions were not same, and now the notion is also breaking again, that I mean, copying the idea is not, I mean, it doesn't work, especially when we think about the country like India, so diverse.
yeah, that's true, because simply copying, as I said, the innovation is also a culture and context specific process. Dissemination is also affected by several factors. So simply copying may not work, but of course we can adapt those ideas to local conditions, and that's where incremental innovation can take place.
Yeah.
And also when we talk about technology, one has to be very careful, as you pointed out, about how do we include everybody. So UPI, I would say, is a frugal innovation. And for example, Bhumi, the
Yeah.
land record
Yeah.
computerization was a great idea where technology was at the back. It was the backbone, but at the front end, the people didn't have to see. One thing we must remember that the new idea or innovation should not put too much emphasis on user owning a device
Yeah.
or having an access to a particular, you know, uh, kind of enabling environment, because I mean, it's somebody should be able to do the thing in the same way as he or she used to do before, but it should be facilitated by an innovation or a technology. That's why no, a lot of these innovations work. And for example, UID, with all its criticism about it being, used in a different context and all that, it did help people get, plug those leakages in the subsidies and things like that. So, but one has to look, even Green Revolution, one can, criticize that, there have been a lot of environmental, adverse effects in the environment because of overuse of fertilizers and things like that, excluded innovations to these ideas. So I think the one thing we must remember is that these things did not remain static. They keep on improving, and we need additional innovations around them to make those ideas work. Remains that something has been able to transform, something has been able to disrupt a particular set way of doing things or a particular way of delivering or facilitating things. That I think is, you could not have depended on the drainage system to be developed fully, to be pipelines to be laid for toilets to be provided by all. So it solved a problem there, that you have this double pit toilet and one can use that. And then when it came to the urban areas, there was a service delivery innovation where can common facilities be provided to people who could use them. And of course there was a huge social fallout of that, of people who were doing manual scavenging. We had to bring them out of that job and put them into the mainstream. So this was a social innovation. It was part technology, part social engineering, and part, I would say, service delivery. So it combines. This is again a very typical example where things come together and you provide one solution.
Yeah. We should also talk about Chota Recharge and missed call marketing. I mean, these are very interesting, ideas which actually transformed India.
Yeah, as I said, they all respond to the situations. For example, missed call. I remember that as a child, uh, it was not called missed call at that time, because we talked about the phones earlier. So there was a public booth somewhere, but one needed a 1 rupee or a 50 paisa coin to be able to talk out of that public booth. So what we used to do as kids, we discovered one day that if you make a call and don't put the coin inside, you're still getting connected, but the other party is not able to listen to what you're saying. But I could listen from what the called party is saying. So it was a one-way communication without saying. So we as the kids, we evolved a system where we'll say, okay, if you are so and so, put it down or call back again. Like that, we could communicate using a telephone line. So that was, I think, it was ingrained, because I mean, it was for fun, but it was ingrained that because we couldn't afford a phone at home, or or a 50 paisa coin to operate that phone. So that was, I think, a form of a missed call at that time. So when mobile phones came to India, as we know, even incoming calls we had to pay. It was a bulky phone, and I think maybe 25 rupees or 30 rupees a minute or something like that. So people evolved this. Innovation part was that trying to use it as a marketing tool. So because the companies advertise today, give us a missed call so that they can call you back. So all the customer doesn't have to do anything. He just have to dial a number and hang up. So many services have been started around that, this kind of system where you're using a missed call to get to the people or gauge a public mind or collect opinion. So many political parties do this. No? That if you're supporting so and so, give me a missed call, or you're supporting this particular idea, you give a missed call. So it has been commercially used. So the innovation part in the missed call is the using it as a tool of market. Of course, individuals have been using it, but the that was not big deal, but people using it as a marketing tool, that is an innovation part. And then you needed a enabling technology for that. You needed to talk to the companies that, how do you handle, suppose I get 5,000 calls or lakhs of calls, you needed a software to handle that. So all that came in the back of it. But the idea was that, can you monetize or can you kind of use this technology? I mean, there were several companies formed to just to market, to handle this kind of a commercial players. So that was, I would say, an innovative idea, which goes back to the days of when there was a deficiency on a telephone service. So people tried to put it to a different use. Same way with Chota Recharge. Chota Recharge is an extension of the sachet concept. If you can buy a sachet for 1 rupee, why not have a recharge for 1 day for 10 rupees or 5 rupees? So it's a marketing tool. It's a innovative way of selling a service, and by doing that, you're able to get more and more people into the net, and it becomes affordable to the people. So, and once it's also a way of customer acquisition, and so many things come around that. But the idea, I think, was inspired by Chota, this sachet business, I would say.
So book also present the process that how which were initially Jugaad, they become innovation. I mean, in this way also book presents the process also, the account, that how the ideas, a few ideas which were initially Jugaad, they become
exactly
innovations.
Yeah. But that is not
become organized.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is not the process. I mean, there is I'm not an expert on how the mind of an innovator works, but there are people who have studied that, and there are a lot of things go. Even people have worked on some of those ideas for decades, So they go on working on their iterations are developed all the time, and you have to put it in a certain design, and there are a number of inputs that go into making. But yes, some of those ideas, as I said, but on their own, they cannot become innovation, but there are other technological input. There are several other standardization needs to come in, and so many things come in. Miscall by itself could not have been innovation, but you needed a technological input, as I said, at the back end. So yes, of course, ideas or inspiration can come from wherever it's possible.
Yeah, and there are a few, historical accounts also, like the story of indelible ink, and especially the story of Amul, which gives you goosebumps when you read it.
Yeah, some of these are very, long and inspiring stories, I would say. For example, indelible ink is one of the first innovations which came in response to the need for conducting elections in a country where 85% people could not read and write. The literacy rate was so low. So how do you, conduct elections? You can't give the names of you needed first innovation was that you needed symbols of political parties and all the candidates, and you could not have given identity cards to everybody in such a short time. But still, the law required that your impersonation cannot be was not to be allowed. So one person who is voted should not come back. So in response to that, this whole thing came up that why not have some kind of a mark so that you are not there. It was a low frugal innovation, I would say. But again, the technology part was done by NPL, as we know earlier. The CSIR, prior to independence, also they had some kind of a technology which was used, and it was in some provincial elections. But then it was refined, but to use it on such a large scale, and to have a political consensus on using it, because again, it was like any new technology, people opposed at that time that okay, it's not foolproof, and people could still impersonate. So all that happened, but something, it is an example of something which has stayed on. I mean, we are still using that technology and the way of doing, despite having identity cards and things like that. So say, because of the sensitivity of elections, it was not just the technology part. It took 20-25 years for it to become part of our process. The technology came in the 70s or early 80s, it was developed, but you needed to convince everybody, you needed to change the law, you needed to demonstrate that it can work on a small scale at some assembly elections, and then on a larger scale in one Lok Sabha election. Then, there was a whole process. So it took 20 almost 30 years, 25 to 30 years from the time technology became available to the time it was fully implemented. So it's one of the best examples of technology which is so widely used by everybody. So both indelible ink and electronic voting machines, I think, and both the ideas came from public sector and companies involved, because there was a lot of secrecy and things like that involved that one could not give it out. So yeah, they have been great success.
And the story of Amul, I mean, which came by a cooperative society, I mean, that is also really very inspiring and very nice to read also. When we read it, we get goosebumps, especially in the book.
Yeah, it's been a very well told story. I think people have even made movies and things like that. And that's again something which happened out of the government system, where you needed to cooperate with the government, but it didn't come from the government system per se. So it was a farmers cooperative. Again, the technological element was how do you convert the milk into powder, so that the period of marketing milk could go up. So there were technological input, and there was a huge social input, because you needed to convince farmers, you needed to form the unions, and then there was a lot of technology. The marketing element. How do you market the milk which is produced? And then there were market challenges, in the sense the existing players are opposed to that. There are political challenges because it went against the notion of so many existing ideas. So it was a technological innovation, which included social, which included marketing, and which included a political inputs, and that made it a success. So that remains. I mean, that is what was then replicated in the oil seed mission to a great extent, and that was an extension of the success in the dairy sector.
Yeah, so list is very interesting and very insightful. But I think, I mean, a few innovations are left. I don't know. I mean, how you selected.
The idea was that how do you know wanted to avoid list of achievements, so to say.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a list of achievements in different departments and different scientific institutions. As I said, they're all very important to develop certain capability in a given particular area. But when you're talking of innovation, how does it impact people? Of course, DNA fingerprinting could have included, or GMRT figures in a different way somewhere in the citizen science, where the GMRT data is being utilized by this citizen astronomers. So there's a fallout of that in that. But yeah, and in fact, what I feel is that in each sector, for example, if you take health itself, you mentioned about the blood pouches, that there are a number of innovations which people have pointed out and which I'm aware of. And so each sector, some of these sectors, for example, education, for example, health, they themselves could make 100 micro innovations each. So of course, you need a longer list and many more books, I would say.
Yeah, maybe think you can think about second volume or so, whatever. Yeah. And the last question I would ask, that you have seen a long time, I mean, is in the development of technology, etc. What do you think, which are the areas which have much more potential to have, I mean, really interesting innovations, and which are the areas which have innovations, which have, I mean, enough innovations, especially when we think about India?
Yeah. No, as I said, the innovation is always in response to a societal need, and that's what I feel. That I mean, I think that should be the goal of even R&D. That, of course, science for the sake of science. That's one part of the story. That people want to advance in a certain area of science and want to do R&D and acquire those capabilities and publish the papers and become leaders in that. But at the end of the day, if there is a societal fallout of that, we need to focus on that. And that's where I think the number of we are a country where a lot of problems still exist. Basic issues like drinking water, education. For example, the pandemic, it threw up so many challenges when it came to education. because everybody could not afford a laptop, and people were taking loans. And you read those stories that people who didn't couldn't afford even daily wages, they sold something to buy laptops or even tablets or mobile phones for the children. So could there have been a better way of delivering education times like this? And there have been innovations, like some teachers went to villages and they held classes in open. So yes, there are basic needs which have to be met, and maybe we need to devise ways of doing things in a better way. I mean, as Professor Anil Gupta, I am always say that we are always responding to certain deficiencies. Why does Jugaad happen? Because things have not been designed properly, or some public needs have not been met. Why do people need to use a contraption to travel in a rural area on rural roads? Because either the roads are not good, or you don't have a smaller vehicle which can run on those roads efficiently. So we have to solve those, I think, felt needs. Field is still wide open, and things are happening. The innovation ecosystem has really taken off. And I mean, if you see some of the new ideas which are coming up, all of them may not become a great success, or they may not become a commercial success, I would say, but they will certainly be useful to the society in many ways. And all those basic areas which I mentioned, I think we need to work, and that's what I feel.
Yeah. So, I mean, how would you comment that uh, the book should be read by the people who are actually interested in innovations, especially the younger generation? I mean, how would it help the youth? I mean, to innovate, like,
No, I
or
think it's
understand
always,
the need.
yeah, it's always good to read about inspirational stories, as we know that, how do people get ideas to do something? How do people get motivated to do something? By reading about great people and great ideas which have gone by. So one can always uh, read them and, try to do things in a better way. I mean, maybe somebody can say, okay, I have a better way of doing the same thing which was done 40 years back. So maybe there's still a need for a more efficient cooking stove. Nutan has lived its life, and kerosene is not that prevalent. So maybe you need to do something there. So it can inspire people to do many more things, and not necessarily in terms of so-called new technology, but in terms of doing existing things in a better way and solving the problems. And that's where I think the ideas need to keep coming. And uh, stories like these can motivate people. That's what I feel. And
Yeah, I feel the same too. I mean, these 100 ideas would inspire people to innovate more. And and it was nice talking to you today uh, on this platform. Uh, Thank you so much for
thank
this
you.
nice conversation.
It was great talking and discussing with you some of the ideas. And I think we should, the whole purpose of the book is the conversation should go on, so that more and more people read and get inspired. Thank you for having me.